It has been almost 3 years since flames tore through the famous Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, severely damaging the more than 850-year-old church, with many fearing it couldn't be saved. Authorities say the fire was likely due to an electrical malfunction. The cathedral and major tourism site is considered one of the finest examples of French Gothic architecture left in the world. And it felt like the whole world was watching and gasping when the beloved spire toppled. But Notre Dame, which translates to Our Lady of Paris, is indeed being restored, as promised by President Emmanuel Macron, who said there would be time for reflection and action. And that's the focus of National Geographic's February issue. The magazine got full access to this elaborate effort, the ultimate fixer-upper. Rob Kunzig is a senior environment editor at National Geographic and author of National Geographic's February cover story. He joins me now from Birmingham in Alabama. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
So, Rob, people think the restoration of Notre Dame has been ongoing since the fire in April 2019. But as you point out in your story, the restoration is only now getting underway. What's been happening since the fire?
That's right, Rosemary. They first had to rescue the church before they could restore it. After the fire destroyed the roof and the oak framework that supported it, and the tall spire that stood at the crossing, there was the church was fragile. It wasn't stabilized by that roof anymore, and high winds could have knocked it down. So they had to buttress the building, and they also had to clean out all the debris, a tremendous amount of debris that had fallen onto the floor of the church. And it was all considered of historical value, that they wanted to study it, the scientists did, so they were very careful and painstaking about the way they removed it.
You also write that this iconic cathedral is being restored true to its past, including rebuilding the lead roof, despite the toxic contamination caused by the one that melted, of course. They're also using wood that's more than 100 years old. How much work, or how much does this stay true to the way the French do things?
They're going to be very faithful to the past of the church, I think. It's really part of the whole doctrine of historical restoration in France. The idea is to try to preserve as much as possible of the authenticity of the building. So this is a church that had stood in the center of Paris and in the center of France since before France was even a nation, for more than 800 years. And it had been heavily restored once before in the 19th century, a very pioneering restoration. They're going to try to preserve all those historical layers as they rebuild it now.
And you spent 5 weeks covering this story, but you were also there the night of the fire, and you had a special tour of the cathedral many years ago. So what personal connection do you feel for Notre Dame?
I feel a pretty strong personal connection. It goes even further back than that. I mean, I've been going to Notre Dame and to Paris on and off for more than 40, maybe close to 50 years now. And I lived in France for a long time myself. And as you say, I had visited the church in the late 90s, thinking I might write an article about it someday, and even gotten a tour of the attic, this what's called the forest that burned in this fire. It's kind of a magical place. So I was primed to write this article. And then by pure happenstance, I live in the United States now, but on the night of the fire, I was visiting Paris again with my wife and friends, and we were driving in a taxi cab in front of the church as the fire was first making its appearance on the roof. And we later stood with the crowds on the banks of the Seine and watched the church burn. It was, well, it was a shocking and heartbreaking evening, but I guess I'm glad to have seen it too.
Yeah, amazing for you to have been there when this was actually happening. And for a lot of us who have visited Notre Dame, to just even watch it on the television is just shocking. And those visuals that go along with your story and this drone footage, just incredible. What was the photographer trying to capture here? And what did you say to the photographer? Did you talk together about what you were trying to achieve here?
We talked a great deal about the story, but I didn't direct the photographer. The photographer, whose name is Thomas van Houtrieve, who's a Parisian himself, a Belgian American living in Paris. He spent more than a year going in and out of the church. He had started on this story even before I did, and laid a lot of the groundwork. And he knows a tremendous amount about it himself. And he went to extreme lengths to get some of those pictures, even dangling from the crane above the great hole left by the tower as it collapsed through the central vaults to get the first picture in our article. So, yeah, he
Yeah, just
he did
amazing. I
a
mean,
lot.
as you're speaking, we're looking at these visuals, and it's just breathtaking. And French President Emmanuel Macron has promised to rebuild the cathedral within 5 years. And now, judging by what you've seen, do you think that deadline can be met?
I'm not an expert, but I do think it's possible, and here's why. I was surprised myself to discover when I visited the church that really the damage was quite confined. Most of the church inside is undamaged. None of the treasures were affected. What was burned was the roof, the attic, and the spire, and that's a lot. But that is something that I think it's possible to rebuild in a few years. I think the spire itself, when it was built in the 19th century, took less than 2 years to build. And so they've got a big incentive. They got the Summer Olympics coming in 2024. They've got a five-star general running the operation, appointed specially by Macron, and he refers to this operation as his task force. So, I think they've got a fire lit under them, so to speak. And I think it's possible they'll do it.
All right, we'll see if they do. Robert Kunzig, thank you so much for talking with this incredible story.
Thank you.
National Geographic's February 2022 issue, with its feature on the restoration of Notre Dame, is on newsstands now. It's also available online at natgeo.com.